Hello, everybody. Steve Stockton here. Welcome back to everything out there on the Clyde Lewis Ground Zero Radio Network. Thank you for me. Thank you for joining me. Also, tonight my special guest is Miranda Young. You know her better as the Ghost Biker from Ghost Biker Explorations and the historic Scott County Jail. Come on in, Miranda. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thank you so much for having me on tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been a while since we talked. I think I was on your show in 2022. I think it's been that long. I've been busy though.
Yeah, it's been quite some time. I've been wanting to catch up because I've been following and seeing you've been doing some really cool things.
Yeah, I'm hard to catch sometimes. I just ask my wife.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway, for those of people that aren't familiar with you, tell us who you are, what you're all about, and all the great stuff you've got going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been really busy over the last couple years, but so my name is Miranda, and I'm better known as the Ghost Biker. I travel around the country on my motorcycle to different haunted and historic locations, and I highlight them on my web series, Ghost Biker Explorations. We just finished the sixth season last year and back in October, and so we're working on the seventh season this year. And so we highlight a lot of the locations that are maybe a little bit lesser known, maybe more. I always tell people that basically, if you close your eyes and touch a map, you're not going to touch anywhere that doesn't have an amazing story. It may be regionally known, but there is always a story somewhere in that area that you're going to touch. And so I use my show to kind of promote the travel and tourism and stuff of some of these smaller, lesser known, more localized locations. Of course, travel all over the country, and I'm a solo investigator, and so I highlight those shows or those locations on my show, and then I have a weekly live stream where we go in and we talk about the places that we highlight, and then also talk to different authors and podcasters and folks, like you, that do things in the paranormal community. And just, gosh, time really flies. um 3 years ago, I formed a company with my best friend and business partner, Dr. Christy Sumner from Soul Sisters Paranormal. We formed the company History, Highways, and Haunts, and opened up a true crime museum and paranormal research center in the historic Scott County Jail in Huntsville, Tennessee. So between that and my series, been extremely busy with working with historic preservation and restoration.
Sounds like you've been about as busy as I have. I love it. So I think the last time we talked, you had ideas for all that, but I'm glad to see that it's come to fruition for you.
Yes, we opened in September 2021. And so we've had right around 150 paranormal teams that have come in. And so, during the day, we're open with our true crime museum for general daytime tours. And then in the evenings, we're open for the after dark tours pretty much every evening and every day but Tuesday and Wednesday. And we just recently opened up an escape room there in the jail where you can escape from one of our cell blocks, and then we're constantly changing our after dark flashlight tour that kind of keep things fresh. We highlight different true crime stories, we highlight the history, and then we share different video, photo, and audio evidence as you go throughout the jail of different things that have been captured there. And all of that's during our after dark and flashlight tours. um, Back in May of last year, we expanded the business and partnered with the Village of Historic Rugby Inc. And we are in charge of all of their after dark tours there at the village. And so that division of our company is called Historic Rugby After Dark. So we're trying to create a more of a destination, if you will, here in rural East Tennessee. We're in the Scott County and Morgan County area. That way, if you're, coming through, you can actually investigate the jail and investigate the village of historic Rugby, because they're only about 20 miles apart. So we're trying to kind of create, rather than just a pass through, something that you can do all weekend long if you're in town.
And I love that you've included Rugby in there. That used to be one of my favorite places to visit when I lived in East Tennessee. Before the show, we were talking about the Harold Road Cafe, which I love to dine at, and you told me that it burned down in my absence, but they're building it back. So that's good. And Rugby, a lot of people don't know much about it or that it even exists, but it was, I think the man's name was Thomas Hughes, that had a utopian vision and brought people over from England and sort of developed that area. And then it didn't quite work out the way they wanted it to. Fell into disrepair. And I remember seeing some of those places when I was a kid. They were basically falling in. Every building over there is haunted, I think, or purported
Absolutely.
to be. And
It
I mean, the
is.
library, and I think there was a bed and breakfast or something over there. It's been 20 years since I've been in Tennessee. So tell us what's going on in Rugby now.
Yeah, so Rugby was really set up for this, and they just hadn't, they hadn't really embraced their paranormal history, because like you said, I mean, pretty much every building there in the village has some type of activity. And so Rugby was founded by Thomas Hughes back in 1880, and he was, of course, an author and member of parliament, and again, a very, very busy person. But he basically took on the plot of the second and third sons of England. And so he wanted to create a place where they could come to, and they could actually, because over in England, they didn't really have a job. They kind of just got an allowance and didn't really, they weren't really trained, because basically it's kind of like, the heir and the spare over in England, and they would have been the second, third sons, they would have been the spares. And so he wanted to create this second British coming, or the second British colony. And so it 18 October 5th of 1880, the doors opened there in Rugby, and quite a few families came over, but they had a lot of ups and downs during the 10 years that Rugby was really a colony. Um, they had outbreak of typhoid fever. They had very, very harsh winters that they weren't used to over here on the Cumberland Plateau. They weren't really equipped for the farming and working the land like he would have hoped. But they had a series of ups and downs, and by about 1890, a lot of the original colonists had already left and moved on to other places. And so Rugby never really became a ghost town, but there was a point in time where there were just a few folks that were living in the area and kind of keeping it up and taking care of it. And so it wasn't until Brian Stagg came along in 1966, and he was a 16-year-old kid at the time, became fascinated with Rugby, wrote a book about it, and got a group together and formed Historic Rugby Inc. And so Rugby got on the National Historic Registry in the early 1970s, and they went to work to restoring and rebuilding some of these structures that were there. At its heyday, there was right around 500 to 600 people that lived there during the 1880s. And so there are 17 of the original structures that are still there today. And there's probably, I believe, last count that I heard, it is a living village. And so at last count, I think there's right around 50 to 60 people that live in Rugby today. And so they do have some of them live in a few of the original houses. Some of them live over in the Beacon Hill subdivision, which basically, if you wanted to live in Rugby, you could buy land, but you had to build a house in that same 1880s Victorian structure. And so some of the houses, they are a little bit newer, but they look like they're from back in the late 1800s. And so it's amazing. little area, the folks there that work for Historic Rugby Inc. do a great job during the day tours and throughout the year with different events um, to to keep rugby going. And we got to, I grew up 20 miles from there over here in Scott County, and so I took piano lessons there from Brian Stagg's mom, and I can remember as a child playing piano there in the house that she lived in, which was known as Roslyn. And personally, it's a private residence, but personally, I think that's one of the most haunted houses there in the area. And I can remember sitting there playing piano and hearing what sounded like an old horse-drawn carriage coming up to the house. And I remember one time in particular stopping, thinking that there was some people that were getting ready to come into the house. And she looked over at me, smacked my hand, and said, "Keep playing, it happens." And, it was one of
Oh,
those
that's
where
great.
yeah, it was one of those where I was like, "Hmm, what there's nobody out there?" And she just, she's like, after the fact, she said, there was no one out there. I was fully expecting someone to come and knock on the door, but, that's a very common thing that a lot of people have talked about that I've found out, after working over there now, that other people have experienced that at that location as well as some of the others. But but we reached out to rugby, and it was about a 6 month in the making partnership. We reached out to them, told them what we do at the jail, and had a plan together as far as opening the some lantern tours, guided ghost hunts, and paranormal investigations. And they came over, they toured the jail, saw what we were doing with that, and loved the idea. And so we now run two different lantern tours there, one of the village and one of the north end and the cemetery. And we do 3 hour guided ghost hunts, and then we have 6.5 hour private paranormal investigations. And folks, if they want to extend that and do a full overnight, they can actually stay there at the village in some of the different lodging options that they have after they do their investigation. So it's really been set up for that, and it's really one of those things because rugby gets a split of the ticket sales on that, and it's just something really cool to add to their portfolio of what they offer, and keeping that history alive and working with the preservation of the village itself.
Yeah, and I love that it's keeping history alive and thriving in that community. They're bringing tourism or whatever, what have you, dollars in there. That's good. Like I said, at one time it just was almost a ghost town, and it's good to see it
Yeah.
thriving again. And I remember that area that you're talking about where they were building new houses, but in Victorian style. That was, I think, back in the
Mhm.
'90s or something when that started, if I
It
recall.
was. Yes, yes.
And I knew some people that bought property over there. Don't know whatever became of them, but I thought that was a great idea because that happens a lot here, like where I am in New England. You got these beautiful old houses, and then they'll tear them down and make some kind of new cookie cutter looking something, and it just doesn't have any soul or any character like those Victorians. I live in a 125-year-old house, so I get it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing about that, the main road used to run through Rugby, but they had so many issues with, like, the, big rigs and 18-wheelers and stuff that was just flying through the village. So back, probably time kinda gets away from me, but I think at least between 10 to 15 years ago, they built a bypass around Rugby. So for investigation purposes, it's great because it's a dark sky community, and it's very quiet at night. But the downside to that is, during the day, people bypass it. You have to know it's there to and have the intention to go back
Yeah.
and
Now that's
and
happened
visit.
since I was there, but I remember, I think, was it Highway 27 that goes through there?
52.
52.
27 yeah, 27 is about 7 miles from there and goes on to 52, and 52 would have been
Okay.
what went straight through it. Yeah.
Okay. I remember going through there. My dad was from Jamestown, And
Mhm.
we lived in West Knoxville, and we would go back to visit family that he had over there, and we would always go through Rugby. So I've driven that way a few times myself, but again, I haven't been over there in at least 20 something years. So I'm sure it's changed a lot.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful motorcycle ride, that whole entire area, and, we do different, motorcycle rides and stuff with, Ghost Biker here and then also with the jail, and we'll go one of our main routes is going there through Rugby and stopping there at RM Brooks General Store. In
Brooks
fact
store, yeah, I used to have to stop
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, in fact, we've actually got a motorcycle ride that we're doing with the jail in 2 weeks. That's going to have a stop there for lunch there at RM Brooks General Store, and RM Brooks is partnering with us and doing a motorcycle appreciation day. So anytime that we can partner with some of these small villages, especially if, or excuse me, small businesses, especially if they have a historic lean to it like RM Brooks does. We always like coming up with some interesting and cool ideas that to include those locations and introduce, people who maybe have either never heard of that spot or introduce them to something a little bit different if they have.
Yeah, and that would be a good place for a motorcycle ride. I never thought about that. Back when I
Yeah.
rode a Harley, I'd always go up to the Smokies and stuff. It didn't even occur to me to go over that direction.
Mhm. Yeah, because Big South Fork is right there. Basically, where we're located at the historic Scott County Jail, you can't go north, south, east, or west without having an amazing motorcycle road with beautiful views, history, um, just great roads. It's we've started this year. We're going to be doing at least one motorcycle ride a month, if not more. We usually do a couple a year, but we're really heavying up on it this summer, and we're partnering with some different businesses all around us and different museums that are all around and starting in different points. So we've got
That's
about
cool.
6 different routes, yeah,
Do
that we're
like a
gonna be
poker
doing that
run,
day.
and each stop is a haunted location or something. That would be that'd be pretty
It
neat.
is. Yeah, that's exactly how we're doing it, and we've actually got, the tours and stuff that talks about some of the towns and different areas that we go through that, it may just look like a little road sign or a little blip on a map as you're passing through, but some of these areas that don't really have a lot in it, back at the early 1900s, some of those areas were sprawling towns that had mining disasters and train wrecks and all kinds of interesting stories that if you're not from the area, you wouldn't really know that that was what went on in that spot because it's just basically in the blink of an eye you're passing through that area. So that's what I like to do with Ghost Biker explorations, with the show and with the rides and stuff, is get the word out about some of these places that people maybe haven't really thought about before.
Yeah, and that's great that you're keeping all that alive. And like you said, especially in the South, every little community has got a crybaby bridge or a place where a
Yes.
lady in white walks after dark or vanishing
Mhm.
hitchhiker, something. And I love those little community things like that. And to them, it's just normal. They know the legend, but
Mhm.
outside of there, people in the next community over may not even know about it or not know as much.
Exactly, exactly. We come across that a lot.
Yeah, the one I wanted to ask you about, I made a video about it years ago. The Devil of Scott County. Have you ever heard that story?
I have. We actually have a it's almost like a life-size, picture from 1921 of the, Scott County Devil there in the historic Scott County Jail,
Yeah,
and that is probably one of our most asked about exhibits because it's interesting because the picture, it's got several gentlemen standing there with this, they describe it as, a giant demon. Of course, they say it's 6'4", which, today is obviously not as giant as it would have been back then. but they describe it as a 6'4" giant with oversized hands, big wings, oversized teeth, and I forget how much it weighed, but it was extremely heavy. And so here's this picture, this black and white picture from the Helenwood Depot, and where they would, where I guess the devil, it's set in there from the early 20s up until the depot was torn down in the 60s, I believe, early 60s. And so, um, don't know where it's at today. Per different stories, different speculation, but it was everybody that's come through the town has heard of the Scott County Devil or the Helenwood Devil.
Yeah, like I said, I made a video about it. It's just fascinating. And now I heard a story in connection with that. Somebody asked me, how could people believe this? But you got to remember, it was the 1920s. A lot of
Hmm.
those hill people over there were very superstitious. And
Hmm.
I've heard a story about in Oneida, just nearby there, when
Hmm.
the first movie theater opened, the crowd gathered in there, the curtains parted, and the scene was an oncoming train. And people got up and ran out of the theater because they thought the train was going to get. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. And people in Oneida deny that, but I've heard it told as the truth.
I've heard that actually. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know on the for the Scott County Devil, it was said that Cruz Sexton, the guy who found it, that he actually charged people a quarter when they get off the train to see it, and apparently made pretty good money on it. Which you got to think, a
Yeah, a
quarter
quarter
back
was a
there in
lot of money. That was
1921 is a
probably
lot.
what, a day's wages or something, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe not a day's wages, but a good chunk of a day. I think.
Mhm.
Remember my dad talking about somebody that had a sawmill or something over there, and he was paying people $1 a day. That sawmill's hard work. So
Yeah.
imagine giving up a quarter to see something like that. But it was a lot of money. It wouldn't have been. It would have been an extravagance, is what I'm trying to say. So based on the
It
picture there, it was really something. But supposedly it
Mhm.
disappeared. They don't know exactly what happened to it. It was, I think, on the way to, or maybe was displayed at the Chicago World's Fair, and then they kind of lost track of it.
That's what I've heard. I know that I know it made some appearances at some different fairs in Kentucky and some different carnivals. And then I had heard I've heard two different things. I've heard that it was on the way to the Chicago World's Fair, and then I had heard it had been displayed at it. So I'm not 100% sure. I do know that the nephew of the guy who found it on his in his cave on his property came into the jail there, and he was actually one that put on loan to us the big picture. And then of course we found several. I think we found three different newspaper articles from 1921 that was talking about this horned beast that he had found. And his nephew had said that whether he had made it there in that cave or whether he had found it. He did say that he did spend some time over in Asia, and they were known for their statue making abilities and stuff, and said that he had become enamored with their style of statue building. And so, either way, whether it was an elaborate hoax or whether it was something that he had actually found, it's pretty incredible for that time period to have found something like that, and then to do what he did with charging for it, and for it to essentially become not just a local legend, but something that folks all over East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee had heard of this, and still talk about it today, which I think is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, if I recall, when they expanded the rail line there to L and N, then it brought a lot more people through from other areas, and they would all get off
Mhm.
there to see this devil that they'd heard about from people like from Florida and places like that. Even so,
Yeah, yeah.
That's just amazing. I've heard also that it's rumored to be in a private museum, like a home museum somewhere in the north. But I don't know. I hope it turns up someday. So I'd like to see it, or at least a life size recreation of it. Surprised somebody hadn't done that.
Yeah, I am too, and that's the thing because we have heard that. We've had people that come into the museum that will ask us about it. And then, of course, we've had people who go up and they actually see the poster and the newspaper articles that we have on the second floor. And then, of course, they come down and they want to talk a little bit more. But I've heard that it's in a somebody's private museum, but whoever has it, I don't think is talking because
Yeah,
we've we've not we've not been able to come across and get any valid confirmation as to where it would be. But
if you can find it, they'd make a fortune if they could get a quarter to see it back in 1920s. They could charge $25 today if people to come and look at it.
yeah, because from the description there in the 20s, it's like either like 500 or 600 pounds. I mean, it's a incredible statue.
Amazing. Now, that little town, Helenwood, I've heard a story about how that town was named. I don't know if it's true or not, but there was some kind of explosion there and the woods caught on fire and it was literally hell in the woods. And then they shortened that to Helenwood. Is that true? Or do you know anything about that? Or have you ever heard that?
That's what we've always heard, and that's what, I always tell when I'm talking about Helenwood. It a lot of the areas there in Scott County, I have several friends from the West Virginia area, and most of them when they come down, they talk about Scott County right there being a lot like West Virginia. There was a lot of coal mines, and then of course there right around 1900 there was a huge influx of people that came into Scott County for the coal and timber boom. And then also in the south end of the county, the clay making boom for with the bricks. And so Helenwood itself, they had several mining disasters. And so I had heard that it was a mining disaster, a dynamite explosion that caused that fire there in the woods, and that was how it got its name because it pretty much devastated the community. It was also a pretty lawless community. A lot of you know gun battles and different things that went on at some of the different taverns and some of the stuff there in the area amongst the coal miners. So that's what I've always heard. And in several of the old Scott County books where they write about the history, they also talk about that as well. So um, that's kind of what I lean to. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess,
And
you
it
know.
was a rough and tumble place from
Hmm.
the accounts I've read and things. And at one time, I think it was around the time of the Civil War, of course, that Scott County tried to secede from the state of Tennessee and become the free and independent state of Scott. So they didn't mess around.
They didn't know there was a unanimous vote to basically, whenever Tennessee seceded from the Union, we seceded from Tennessee, and we're only one of three other enclave states that did that, and so we became the free and independent state of Scott. And because of this upset Nashville, and they sent like 1,300 troops over from Nashville, causing two minor skirmishes. They weren't actually battles, but two minor skirmishes. The Battle of Brimstone and the Battle of Huntsville Mountain. And because of that, we had a lot of homes that were split. A lot of people, they tended in the area to side a little more with the Union because basically they just really didn't want to be involved.
Yeah.
And there were some slaves there in Scott County, not too many, but there were a few. And so you had homes that were split. Now, the majority of the fighting that took place was mostly guerrilla warfare. So it wasn't, but you did have, when you go to the cemeteries, I have some in my family. My great my great uncles and my great great uncles on my dad's side. um, they had where you would have brother fighting brother, one siding with the Union, one siding with the Confederacy. But for the most part in the area, it was guerrilla warfare. And the fascinating thing about that was that even though it was never technically recognized by the state, they actually didn't take it off the books until 1986 when
Wow.
Lamar Alexander did a great homecoming, and they actually welcomed us back into the state of Tennessee back in '86.
That's awesome. And the Tennessee state of Tennessee itself was one time the state of Franklin, so it's switched around a
Yeah.
few times.
Yeah, such a fascinating history with Tennessee, with the Civil War, and then just leading on forward from that. Some of these little rural communities, like when you look at historic Rugby, or when you look at Scott County itself, just an amazing history. I mean, we've created an entire ghost walk just in Huntsville alone that we take, that you get to, an hour of it is inside the jail. Another 45 minutes to an hour is really just walking around Huntsville, talking about the history of the county, and talking about, some of the interesting history and haunts of the area that people might not really think about. And then go on over into Rugby, which again is about 20 minutes away or 20 miles away, and you have inside of some of these homes, Thomas Hughes was really good friends with Charles Dickens. And so there's like first edition drawings from Charles Dickens's books in the Thomas Hughes house there, and first editions of Black Beauty and Swiss Family Robinsons, and prayer books from the 1600s that's in the library there inside Rugby. And you just wouldn't think in some of these small rural
Yeah, you
communities.
wouldn't think a little community like that, rural community
Yeah,
in Tennessee, that you'd have something like that. But there you go. There's all kinds of surprises over there.
absolutely. Just in that area itself. So that's what we always tell people. It may be a small footprint, but it packs a big paranormal and historical punch in this area. And so we get people that hear about it and stop in, and they're just amazed by what they find with the history. And you find that a lot in some of these places. If you just stop and listen or stop and look, you can find some really interesting things in some of these really small towns.
I love it. And what are some of the other legends and folklore over there that people might not have heard of?
Well, for the jail, some of the things that I'll start with that, since that's where our headquarters is, or our office is there in the jail. You know, it's technically the third jail in Scott County. It was built in 1904 and in operation until 2008, and it's, shaped like a castle there in the middle of East Tennessee, a three-story sandstone castle. And we've had most of our earliest inmates, they were either ridge runners or moonshiners. And we have everything there at the jail um, from a sheriff that was killed there at the front door. It was an unsolved murder. He was killed ambush style when he was bringing in a moonshiner, and that is one of our unsolved murders there in the county. There were some deathbed confessionals and some people who thought they knew who it was, but there was really no positive arrest or anything on that. But that is Sheriff Richard Ellis, and he does hang out there at the jail. We get both residual and intelligent activity there from him on all three floors. And then we've had 7 lynch mobs that have come into the jail and taken different inmates out. We do think there were more, but those are the ones that we actually have the newspaper articles, death certificates on. Um, and then we've had 14 officers who were killed in the line of duty, which is a pretty high number for a small rural community. And then, of course, each of those have their own interesting stories that go with that. Um, and then, of course, there's just some really different and interesting local stories that are associated there with the jail. With being open for that period of time, there were a lot of people that crossed through those doors. Now, Scott County itself, one of the are kind of going on out a little bit there in Huntsville and Scott County itself. Jesse James, he did spend some time there in Huntsville. He was there for 8 months. Now, Huntsville looked a lot different during that time than it does now. Huntsville is the county seat. It was labeled that because it's a horse ride or a day's horse ride from anywhere in the county. And so at that point in time when Jesse James was there, it was a big city at that point. There were several hotels, there were blacksmith shops, lawyers' offices, lots of general stores, big courthouse, of course, the jail. But Jesse James, he did stay there in Sharp's Hotel, and he was there. Didn't tell anybody that it was him. He went by the name David Moore while he was there, and ran a feed and seed store with his brother. Now, by all accounts, he was an honest businessman while he was there. Now, he was technically hiding out for some crimes that he had committed when he was up in Kentucky. And he confessed to Junior Sharp, who was the son of the motel owner. But he was the only one that actually knew that was Jesse James. And so after about 8 months, all of a sudden he and his brother just up and disappears. That's when they went on out west. They did go through Fentress County because there's some stories and accounts of them there. But basically, he just headed on out west. And of course, the rest is history because that was when he headed on out to Missouri. But we do have the full article of that in the jail that kind of talks about some of the accounts of people who had encountered him, and the story that Junior Sharp shared about knowing Jesse James when he was there. We had one of our sheriffs. We always say when it comes to the jail or to Huntsville itself that the jail was such a big important building to our community there, and that most people had somebody that served in some capacity. They either served as a sheriff or served as the sheriff's wife, who was the cook. So they had somebody that served in the capacity of being on the law side of things, maybe even a deputy, or they had family who served time in there. And there was a couple instances where we had someone who served as both sheriff and served as inmate. And that particular person was Marion Carson. He served as a deputy most of his life out there, and then he was elected as sheriff in 1976. And as you're going into the jail, there is there by the door, carved into the sidewalk, is it says M. Carson, 1976 dash, and there's no end date. And the reason there's no end date is he allegedly got involved with the Escobar drug cartel. And so there was a undercover FBI sting that took place there, not just in Scott County, but in Roane County, Anderson County. It was all the surrounding areas. And so they ended up arresting 12 different officials in the surrounding area that had gotten involved with the Escobar drug cartel. And so, unfortunately, Marion Carson, he was arrested, and he did pass in federal prison. But from all accounts that we've heard from folks that come in, it is a divisive conversation there, and a lot of folks say that even if he were still alive today, he would probably still get elected because a lot of people liked him that much. So we have a lot of stories like that associated with the jail and associated there with Huntsville. Um, there there is a story about our courthouse, of one of the a guy, Doc Chambers. He was on trial there back in 1942 against. He was a one of our prominent physicians, and he was suing one of his customers, or one of his patients, for unpaid medical bills. And there was an altercation that broke out there during the court trial. And Doc Chambers just reached into his pocket and pulled out his gun and shot the guy he was suing there on the stand. And so, because of this, there have been stories and rumors there at the courthouse that the courthouse has, you can hear phantom gunshots and that you can see shadow figures. There's also one of the older homes that's there. There is a lady in white, that is often heard crying and wailing there at the stairwell that we talk about that. We also talk about the Vanderpool lights that are seen in one of the cemeteries that is kind of a few miles down from the square there. Um, Not really sure what those lights are, but several people have seen them, including Senator Howard Baker, who is from Scott County. And he wrote a little snippet in one of his books about the Vanderpool lights. So, and of course, the county itself is just full of different stories as far as, some of the back roads and stuff, some of the things that you may encounter if you're driving on these back roads at night. There's one that's one of like a headless hitchhiker that can be seen on one of the mountain roads that several people have swore just throughout the generations, that they've encountered. A lot of little areas like that. And, I'm sure that's kind of the same way with a lot of little small towns in the area.
Yeah, I've heard similar stories like that from Fentress County and Cumberland
Mhm.
County and some places like that. But again, I think every little community, every little place has those kind of legends.
Mhm.
It's fascinating to think about. I wanted to get back to the jail for a minute. Last
Mhm.
week on this show, I had my friend Michael Laciano on, and he
Yes.
mentioned you. That was why I thought to get back in touch with you and see if you wanted to come on here.
Okay.
Now, did he record some EVPs while he was there at the Scott County Jail?
Uh, no, I don't think he has been to the jail yet. I think he's planning to come. I don't I don't know of him recording any there.
Okay, I
Like I
know
said,
he
I don't
got
think he's
some
been.
at over Petros at the Brushy Mountain
Yes.
prison,
Mhm.
and I think they've got kind of the same thing that they do over there at the prison now. Now that's just outside of Wartburg or Wattburg if you're from that area. And I heard some good EVPs from there. That's frightening place. Of course, that's very storied. That's where James Earl Ray was, and been all kinds of murders and things inside the prison. So no doubt it's haunted.
No doubt about it. I have actually investigated Brushy Mountain on 6 different occasions,
Wow.
and on one of those occasions, I actually slept there in the solitary confinement, or the hole. And that's the place I got some of my best EVPs, Class A EVPs, very intelligent, as well as some residual. I slept for about 3.5 hours and got like a solid 3 minute and 15 second, um, when I compiled it all together, series of EVPs. And what's fascinating about Brushy Mountain is that's where we would have sent our state or federal um, prisoners from the jail. So, being a county jail, you have typically shorter sentences, but the ones who were murderers, or like I said, had committed a state or federal crime and they were sentenced, we would send them to Brushy Mountain or to Morgan County correctional facility if they had the longer sentence. So there's that connection there. And Brushy's right about 45 minutes from the jail. And they have that set up as a really great destination where you can go and you can eat some great barbecue, get you some liquor. They've got a distillery there, and on the property itself, or spend the night and do a paranormal investigation. And the tours they do are great too because they're led by former prison guards or former inmates. And I just, I absolutely love that location. And Michael, he's such a good investigator and usually gets some amazing EVPs. So I can't wait for him to come and check out the jail
Yeah, I
and
was thinking
Rugby.
he'd already been there. We talked to so many different locations, but yeah,
Yeah,
and I told him I think it's him because he has all this equipment. He started out like with a big reel to reel tape deck, and I
yeah,
think it's just him. I think he's haunted. I think he could take a Fisher Price kid's cassette recorder in there and get EVPs. But he does. He has some of the most amazing that I've ever
yeah,
heard. We played about a dozen on last week's episode, and some of them are frightening. I mean, there's very distinct voices. You could hear accents. There was one that sounded like a little girl, and this was in a place where there were absolutely no children, and
yeah.
he gets some good stuff. I'll really be interested to see what he gets when he does come to the Scott County Jail.
Yeah, I actually had the pleasure of getting to meet him in person at Henry River Mill Village there in Hickory, North Carolina. And
Now, is
we
that the one
talked.
that they used in the Hunger Games?
It is. It is. Yeah, that
Yeah,
that
he mentioned that.
great location and great great EVPs from that place. Um, that's probably I was speaking at an event and playing some of the EVPs there. I think it was their Booze and Brews event that they had a few years back, and I know it's not very far from where Michael lives or where he lived at one time, at least. And so he came over and actually got to meet him in person. And I just love chatting with him because he's got some great stories and just just an amazing investigator.
Yeah, and I've been on with on Cisco Murdoch's Journey Through the Gate Paranormal Portal podcast. I've been on with her when he's been a guest too. That's the first place I
Oh,
met him
nice.
several years ago, and he's just fascinating. And he's lived some of the same places I have. He lived in Mountain City, Tennessee, for a while, which is
Hmm.
way up in the northeastern tip up there. A lot of spooky stuff up there too.
Yeah. Yeah. Jonesboro and all that up in that, the old part of East Tennessee there.
Yeah, and that was a nice thing about Mountain City. You were close to Boone, North Carolina,
Hmm.
and from there it wasn't too far on over to Brown Mountain. I've seen the Brown Mountain lights several times. Or
Oh,
you could
wow.
go to Damascus, Virginia, or down to Johnson City and the Tri Cities. A lot of haunted stuff down there. ETSU, that campus is supposed to be
Yes.
haunted. And Abingdon, Virginia, just down the road from Damascus there. The Martha Washington Inn, and then across the street from that, Barter Theater. Both those locations are just super active.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just the, I don't think there's a shortage of places here in East Tennessee or just in Tennessee itself that doesn't have something going on.
So, out of the places that you have visited or investigated, what do you consider the most active or the one that was the scariest for you? The sleeping in the prison, that sounds scary to me.
That was pretty intense. Like I said, I think on that one, I probably got it's probably the some of the best EVPs that I've ever captured because what I did was so I'm typically a solo investigator, but I will collab on some and I like to keep it small when I'm investigating. That way I can account for just investigate with one or two other people if I'm not investigating solo, just so I can account for everything that's going on. But on that particular night, It was part of a full weekend investigation. And so the first day I was investigating, or the first night I was investigating by myself. And then the second night, um, the folks that run the paranormal there was doing something a little special and different. And they had invited back some of their friends that had investigated early on. And so I was one of the people they had invited back. And so there was about 9 other people that were coming back on that Saturday night. And so so I had investigated all night Friday night, and it was about 8:30 that morning. And so I thought I'm going to I'm going to try something a little bit different from what I typically do. And I put a recorder out as well as some cameras, and I went over to the hole to sleep. I just kind of felt drawn to sleep there, and part of that was because it was dark. And so it was dark and cooler. But the hole is just what it sounds like. It's basically a hole there that there were three different cells, and that's where they would put if you had misbehaved. They would put you in there, and basically you had two buckets, one to use the bathroom in and one for your food. And it said that basically it was so dark that by the time you came out of there, most people, they had a hard time seeing because they would be in there for like up to 28 days. And so I didn't even know if I'd be able to sleep, but I was so tired after investigating, and I thought if I can just get just a little bit of, a few hours of sleep, I'll be fine. And I actually went right off to sleep. And I did wake up just a couple times. Nothing touched me, nothing made a sound that I was able to pinpoint that woke me up, at least in the moment. But when I went back and watched my video and audio evidence, there was somebody walking. And of course, the only people on the property that morning was myself and then the two ladies that run the paranormal there. And they were actually asleep in the office. And so I was in the hole was in a totally different building than the main prison. And so you hear something walking in the hall or on the stairs there. And it sounds like it comes up to my door, and in just this deep, garbled, gravelly voice, you hear something say, "Night, night." And as clear as can be. And then what I did was I put it together as a montage, and I highlighted it in season 2 of Ghost Biker Explorations. But basically, at one point, you hear a conversation of two men. There were no men on the property that morning. You hear a conversation of two men. One sounds like they may be in my cell. The other sounds like the cell beside me. It's real muffled. And then you hear this deep voice guy say, "Help me." And then it was like a whisper that says, "Help me." And it sounds clearly male as well. And it sounded almost in distress. Um, there's laughing going on and cell doors slamming. And then at one point, it sounds like, I believe this was residual. And at this time, this would have been, I believe, in 2015 or 16. So Brushy was not open. There was no power in the building, and it wasn't open. It didn't open until 2019 for people to come in and actually be able to take tours and the museum and such. It wasn't open till then. So on the upper level above the hole, that's where the laundry room is. And so at one point in time, you hear what sounds like a dryer door slam, and then it sounds like it's running, which at, you know, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, that would have been when laundry would have been going on. So I was getting a lot of residual sounds, but you can hear that unmistakable dryer sound, and there was no power there. And then the thing that was the most puzzling to me was for 5 minutes straight toward the end of the recording, you hear what sounds almost like a ball being bounced against the wall. It's almost like it bounces on the floor, hits the wall, bounces back onto the floor, and back to the hand. And it goes for 5 whole minutes, and it's just a back and forth. Now, I don't know if it was a ball. That's just what it sounded like to me, because it's just consistent for 5 minutes. And I was on a podcast playing that series of EVPs, and I was talking to a guy who used to be a former corrections officer up in New England. And he said that actually makes a lot of sense, because he said at that point in time, in the late 70s, early 80s, it wouldn't have been uncommon for them to have been given a rubber ball, because a rubber ball would be something that would be a little bit harder to fashion into some type of shank.
Yeah.
And so I believe that was some type of residual thing that could have been very common, that you would hear it there inside the hole.
Wow. That's quite a story. I don't think I could sleep in there. And I've spent the night in some haunted places, but there's just something about a prison that, and I've seen Alcatraz and stuff, but I don't think I would want to spend the night in any prison. Although when I do come back to Tennessee, I might do one of those overnights in the Scott County Jail. That sounds fascinating.
I would love to see what you would get there at the Scott County Jail. You know, I to me that kind of changed. I was not expecting to hear all of that when I was going back and reviewing my evidence. And so if I get the opportunity when I'm at a location and I don't spend my time sleeping at the places, but if I can either stay overnight or lay down for a few hours, I get a lot of different things when I'm actively investigating versus when I'm in more of a subconscious, relaxed, vulnerable state of sleeping. And I really like trying that sometimes, because sometimes if it's a quiet night and nothing's happening, it's almost like turning on a light switch when I'm laying there sleeping, because sometimes I get intelligent responses based on what I'm doing, and if I'm sleeping, it I don't know if it is unusual to the spirits there, or if maybe they're more comfortable communicating when I'm in that vulnerable state. I haven't really figured out exactly why I get that different activity, but it's definitely an experiment I like to try, especially in a place like a prison, because it would have been unusual or uncommon for a female to have
Yeah, yeah,
been
that's what
there
I
in
was
the hole.
thinking.
Hmm.
Nothing else that'll stir the spirits up.
Yeah, yeah. So, but now at our jail, we had both male and female inmates inside there. But of course, at the big prison, they really the only females that were in there would have been ones who were either cooking or worked in administration of some sorts.
Yeah. Well, now what about as far as your bucket list? What is some place that you haven't been that you'd love to go? What's the top of your list there?
You know, I would love to load up the bike and head out maybe on Route 66, stopping at some of the different local legends or some of the different stories there along that route.
That's a
Um,
fun drive. I've done it in a car, but it would be
yeah.
great on a bike. And I was in a hurry. I was moving from Orlando to Las Vegas, and I think I left Orlando on a Thursday, and I had a job waiting on me in Vegas Monday, so I didn't get to take a whole lot of
Oh,
time
yeah.
to see the country. But I'd love to do that just as a leisurely drive, and there's a lot of places along that route
Yeah.
too.
Yes, so many places to just stop, and hit up some of those well-known places. I would either like to do that or just take off on several different bike rides and hit. I'd like to hit some locations there on Route 66, several on the Mississippi Blues Trail, and then like the Natchez Trace, and just see if get the ride in itself, but then stop at several of those places, and or stop at as many of them as I could, and share those stories, and see if there's any paranormal activity along the way.
Wow, sounds like a lot of fun. Book wise, what are you up to? Have you got a book in the works?
I've got one that I've been kicking around that is a little bit different. That so I'm an artist, and I draw a lot of the locations that I visit. I'm trying to draw all of them, but um, I the book is part drawing and part investigation, and it's kind of chronicling those investigations that I've done, and with the artwork that I've done. I've no idea when that will be finished, but it's something I've
Sounds
been working
fascinating, though.
on.
I look forward to it, especially with the artwork and describing or showing what you're describing there. That'd be great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, just like I said, it's just something a little bit different, because I always that's how I fund my web series, is through my artwork, through the sale of the prints. And so I always try to draw the location and give the original to the owner of the location, whether it be either a commercial location or a lesser known place. And then I get prints made of it, and then I fund my travels by the sale of those prints. And so,
Oh, that's cool. Now, where are
yeah,
those available at? Do you have like an Etsy shop, or do you sell them on your website, or how
I've
can
got
people
them
get
on
in
my
touch with you?
website.
Okay.
Yeah. And, but if somebody, sees something there, they can also just reach out to me. I've got them on my Facebook page, but then also on ghostbikerexplorations.com.
I'll put those links in the show description. Well,
Wonderful. Thank you.
Miranda, we're almost out of time here tonight, but I want to thank you for joining me, and I look forward to being on your show at the end of the month. It's been a couple of years since I've been over there, but thanks again for being here. And one more time, tell everybody where they can find out about you online.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you, Steve, for having me on. This has been so much fun, and any opportunity I get to be able to sit down and chat with you, I always want to take you up on that, and always
Well,
look
thank you.
forward
I
to it.
appreciate that.
Absolutely. So folks can go back and watch all of the past seasons of Ghost Biker Explorations on the Ghost Biker Explorations YouTube channel or the Ghost Biker Explorations Facebook page. They can also watch the weekly live stream that we do on Thursday nights on those two pages as well. You can also go to www.ghostbikerexplorations.com, and I believe there are links to listen to past podcasts, watch the past episodes. You can buy Ghost Biker merchandise, including those drawings, and find out about events and special appearances that's going to be going on. Now, you can also follow us under the Historic Scott County Jail Facebook page, or the Historic Scott Co Jail.com. And then also, if you look up Historic Rugby After Dark, you can find out more information about all the cool things that we've got going on there at Rugby. Or we have one full website that has a link to the jail and a link to Rugby, and that is historyhighwayshaunts.com.
That's awesome. Thanks again, Miranda. We're going to get out of here. Everybody, have a good night, and be sure and check out Miranda's links there. Thanks again, Miranda.
Thank you, Steve, and thank
Ghost
you, everyone.
Biker Explorations and the Historic Scott County Jail. Good night, everybody.